Daniel 5. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles,
So I just read something online suggesting that Belshazzar wasn't the direct son of Nebuchadnezzar. I don't know what the case truly is, but certainly he could have been a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, but he would have had to been pretty close because we were still talking about it in the lifetime of Daniel, so we're still in the 500s BC, mid 500s, I think, early to mid. So whether Belshazzar was the direct son of Nebuchadnezzar or not really doesn't matter to me. He could have been a descendant or he could have been a relative, but to me it doesn't make that much difference. And I also don't know if this was during the time that Nebuchadnezzar had lost his mind, because it was for 7 times that Nebuchadnezzar was in the wilderness living like an animal. So I don't know if this is an interim king or if this was after the end of Nebuchadnezzar's death or reign. But anyway, none of that really matters. It's just interesting to try to figure out.
his wives and his concubines might drink from them.
So King Belshazzar has taken the gold and silver goblets from the Jewish temple to profane them and use them for his personal reasons.
So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
So not only is it offensive that they were using the Jewish temple goblets for their own purposes, they were also praising the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which was a double offense to God.
Suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking.
So I don't know if this hand was larger than a normal hand, but it just says a hand. It doesn't say a person with a hand. It just says a hand was writing. And it was obviously something terrifying to the king and all who saw it, but I don't know if others saw it. But certainly the king saw it.
The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom."
And so Daniel was already the leader of the wise men of Babylon, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah had also been promoted within that group of people. And so you would think that they would have a tremendous influence over the wise men as the leaders of the wise men.
Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled.
So it seems to me that the wise men maybe had reverted back to their old Babylonian ways of being wise, even though their leaders, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were godly Jews who understood the power of God to interpret dreams and to even provide all wisdom. But these people didn't seem to reflect that same attitude that I would expect them to have with these Jewish leaders.
The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means."
So the queen, and I don't know if that means it's Belshazzar's wife or maybe Nebuchadnezzar's wife. I don't exactly know who that was, but the queen, let's see what this note says. Or queen mother. So it's possible it was Nebuchadnezzar's wife who had seen Daniel perform these interpretations and things. But I'm surprised that the wise men and nobles didn't refer Daniel to the case, since Daniel was their leader. But anyway, it takes the queen or the queen mother to refer Daniel.
So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means."
I don't know why Daniel refused the gifts. It seems kind of pointless anyway, because I think Daniel was already one of the highest nobles in the land. He had already been promoted and appointed chief of the wise men. So I think it wouldn't. But it also gives the idea that maybe Daniel didn't like Belshazzar as much as he liked Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe he was refusing his gifts and didn't even want to be a part of his kingdom. I'm not sure.
"Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes."
Now, since Daniel is explaining in the past tense what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, that makes me think that this Belshazzar is the successor to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was dead. He had already lived in the wilderness as a beast who lost his mind and then returned. And in chapter 4, we have Nebuchadnezzar writing chapter 4, explaining how he came to understand that God is sovereign over all, and he appoints leaders and kings and takes away whatever he wants to take away from anybody at any time.
But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this.
So Nebuchadnezzar, after he had been humbled and regained his sanity, he came back and praised God and gave God the glory. And Belshazzar saw it. So he should have humbled himself, but he was only looking for his own glory, even though he had been taught the lesson by his father or ancestor, Nebuchadnezzar. So he had ample opportunity to have the right attitude and missed out on it.
Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines drank wine from them.
So also it says your wives and concubines. That makes me think that the queen that was mentioned earlier, who referenced Daniel to the problem, referred Daniel for the problem, was not Belshazzar's wife. It was probably his mother, or maybe the wife of Nebuchadnezzar.
You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways.
So this is a key element of God that we should always hold on our hearts and understand fully. That God holds your life in his hand, and also all your ways. Everything you do and every breath you take is a gift from God. God is sovereign. He has control and power over your life to do whatever he wants to do. Whether he appoints you king of Babylon or a peasant, whatever it is that's going on in your life, God is sovereign over your life. He holds your life in his hand and all your ways.
Therefore he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom.
So Daniel told him to keep his gifts, but he still gave him the gifts anyway, even though the interpretation is bad news, which is a little shocking. Typically kings do not like bad news. But he says, your days are numbered, you've been weighed and found wanting, and your kingdom is divided. And he even tells who's going to take them. The Medes and Persians are going to take your kingdom. But Daniel still gets promoted.
That very night Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62.
Let's see what this note says. Oh, nothing. Oh, so the very night when he got the interpretation, Daniel is promoted and Belshazzar is killed in the exact same night. And the most powerful kingdom in the world is transferring hands from Babylon to the Medo-Persian kingdom. That's Daniel chapter 5.